Hi, welcome to this demo of IBM Spectrum Protect and our support for Cloud Data Lock with IBM COS Immutable Objects. Back in version 8.1.15, we introduced this capability for the AWS Cloud Storage Pools, and now we're introducing it for both on-prem and off-prem IBM COS Immutable Object Storage. Now you will hear this Cloud Data Lock also referred to as Immutable Storage, Worm Storage, Cloud Worm Read. So there's lots of names that refer to it. To be very specific about what we are referring to for the IBM COS Immutable Object Storage, check out this web page. In this demo, we're going to cover both the IBM Cloud Object Storage System on-premise setup and the IBM Cloud Object Storage public cloud setup. And the important thing on both of these is going to be the setup of your retention duration, minimum duration, and maximum duration. And these numbers are important because they work in conjunction with our defined storage pool, where we do this enable cloud data lock equals yes, and then we set this cloud data lock duration to a specific number of days. Now this is only supported for your container storage pools, not your retention sets or database backups out to the cloud at this point in time. And once you set this enable cloud data lock equals yes on those cloud container storage pools, that is permanent. You cannot undo it. You can update your cloud data lock duration, but that's all. So the reason that this cloud data lock duration is important is that it must be set in conjunction with what your policy is that governs how long we keep backed up objects inside of the Spectrum Protect inventory. So remember, when a Spectrum Protect client backs up its data to the Spectrum Protect server, a policy is assigned to it. And this policy has a retention period that says this is how long we're going to retain the individual backed up objects. So we take those objects and we dedupe them, we break them up into chunks, and then we take like 1 gig of these chunks and we upload them into a container. This is a Spectrum Protect container inside of the COS bucket. This entire container is then locked for that cloud data lock duration. So on a daily basis, the Spectrum Protect server goes through and starts expiring off any of the chunks of data inside of that container whose policy time limit is up. And then on a regular basis, Spectrum Protect also checks to see if that container still has a lock placed on it. And if that lock is about to run out of time, but there are still chunks of data that have not yet expired inside of the container, then Spectrum Protect will update that container lock by another cloud data lock duration days. And it'll keep doing this until all of the chunks of data inside of that container have expired off. Once that happens and all the data has expired off, we put that container in pending until the container lock is also expired. And then at that point, we can delete off the entire container. So you can see why it's important that you coordinate your policy and your cloud data lock duration. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jay. He's going to walk through how to set up the buckets inside the on-prem and public cloud. He'll also show how to define the connections in the storage pool inside of the command line. And then we'll turn it over to Aeon, and she'll walk us through how to define the connections and storage pools inside of the Spectrum Protect Operations Center.
First off, this page is the feature that we're exploiting, IBM Cloud Object Storage. They call it different things in different places, but in this documentation here, they call it Immutable Object Storage. And then you'll see on the panels that we're going to show, they call it retention in places. I'm going to begin with the IBM Cloud Object Storage server on-prem device. The setup for this is important because you have to configure the bucket or the vault correctly to use this feature. The vaults page on our IBM Cloud Object Storage device, and we're going to create a new vault. In this case, we're going to create a custom vault on the storage pool and click continue. I'm going to give the vault a name. There's some settings you have to pick. In this case, I'm going to pick storage efficiency, but it doesn't matter for the case of this feature that we're going to do. The next section here is protection, and they list retention, and that's the feature that we want to enable here. So we'll enable that. It'll give you a warning saying that once it's enabled, you can't disable it, but we're going to do that. So enable. And it's going to ask us for some values here. First value, the retention duration. It's the default if the object is written and we don't specify a duration when we upload the object. Now, in the case of Spectrum Protect, we're going to specify the duration when we upload the object, but we still have to select the default here. I'm going to select the default of 1. You could set the default to 0. I wouldn't recommend setting the default as high as they have, because if we make a mistake sometime or there's some other objects written to that bucket or vault, then you'd end up locking up the object for that many days. Again, when we write the objects, we're going to specify the duration. The default's not that important. However, if this default duration doesn't match what we specify on the pool later on our side, we'll give a warning saying they don't match. Minimum duration, this is important for us. In the IBM Cloud case, we're going to require that the minimum duration be set to 0. This is because when we come up and connect to the bucket the first time, we're going to do some testing of reads and writes and write a test object out. And in some cases, we want to set that object to be deletable immediately. So we need this minimum duration to be 0. And then there's this maximum duration. I wouldn't set it up this high again, just in case somebody writes something to the vault or bucket. We don't want it to be 36,000 days locked up. That would not be good. So I'd recommend a lower value, but again, that's going to depend on your use case, but 30 days is good. When we write the objects out, we're going to specify the duration. So it's not critical, but it'd be a good idea not to have it up super high. You want it at least as high as what you're going to set on the storage pool here in a minute. That's the main piece here that you need to enable on your vault. There's some other settings here that aren't relevant to this feature, but you can do what you want there with them. I'll click Save. There's some things here that you need to do to make the bucket or vault accessible. And the first is this deployment. You need to specify the access pool and click Update there. Without that, there's no way to reach the bucket externally. Specify a user who can access this. And I'm going to just say move to owner. And now I'll be the owner of this bucket, and I'll have write permission and all the permissions I need. And we'll say update. Only an admin can set the authorized users. Just be aware of that. If you don't see this section here on authorized users, then you don't have the right permissions in the Cloud Object Storage Manager. Okay, so now the bucket's ready to go on the cloud side here. So that will bring you over now to Spectrum Protect. So on the Spectrum Protect side, what we want to do is define a connection that uses that bucket. So I'm going to create a connection. I'm going to call it C2. This is the bucket name that I specified on the ICOS side. There we go. So the connection is defined. We can test that connection if we want with the validate cloud. We'll just do that just to make sure everything's connected. Again, when we do this, we'll write a test object here. And in this case, the first time through, we'll actually write an object with the default duration. We will do a query connection for that connection. If we do the validate cloud with that connection, we'll actually detect what type of cloud we're talking to. We're talking to an IBM COS. So now we'll know that we can do data lock later on with that. So now once you have the connection in place, we can do the define storage pool command. And this is where we can specify that we want to do the cloud data lock. What we need to do to enable this on the Spectrum Protect side, you need to specify the enable cloud data lock equals yes. This option or parameter can only be specified on the define storage pool command. Once it's turned on, it can't be turned off. So there's no parallel parameter on the update storage pool for enabling this. And then the next parameter is the cloud data lock duration. And this is in number of days. So we're going to set it for test purposes to 1 day. But in a production environment, you'd want to set this higher. If you're going to save your backups for 30 days, you probably want to set it to that or maybe halfway. But you definitely want it to be over, say, 7 days on a production type environment. So we've now defined the storage pool and it's ready to go. The cloud data lock enabled. We'll want to define a storage pool directory, and then you can begin using this pool just like normal. We're not going to go through all those steps there, but I do have another pool that's set up that has enabled Cloud Data Lock. One thing we want to look at is containers. For a container, F equals D. In this case, I've written data to that locked pool, and we've already uploaded these containers to the object storage. And you can see here that at the end, we have a column, Cloud Data Lock expiration. This is the date when the container will become unlocked. So today is July 25th, and we set the duration to a day. So on July 26th, tomorrow, this container will be eligible for deletion. But it will only be deleted if all the data extents that are in that container have expired. If there is any extents that are still needed, or in other words, not expired, we'll go ahead and we'll extend this date for another duration period. So we'll keep extending these containers until they no longer have any usable extents in them. One thing to note that's different here than the Amazon object lock case is that in the Amazon case, Amazon uses versioning on the objects to enable this feature. And when we're in the Amazon case, we'll record version numbers for these containers to keep track of which version we wrote. In the IBM Cloud case, they don't use that same ability. So there's no versioning recorded on these containers when they're written. We keep track of the versioning internally. We don't expose that to the end user when using this on IBM Cloud. So that's the basics of how to set this up and the usage on the IBM Cloud Object Storage server on-prem device. I'm going to show now how to set this up on the IBM Cloud, the public cloud here. So this is the IBM Cloud console, the buckets page. And we're going to go ahead and create a new bucket. Select this one here that says customize your bucket. First, you need to enter bucket names. You can select different resiliency levels, locations, storage classes. You can use any of these depending on what your needs are. You cannot enable object versioning on here. It will tell you you can't do that. If you go here and select retention policy, because that's what we want to do, select add. So you'll notice here that they give you the 3 parameters to set the minimum duration. We're going to require that this minimum retention period is set to 0. The default retention period, in our case, for demo purposes, we're going to set that to 1. And again, when we write the containers out, we're going to set the value that you specify on the storage pool, but you have to give it a default. And then the maximum retention period, we're going to set 30 days. You just want to make sure that this value here, the maximum retention period, is at least as big as the value that we're going to set on the storage pool. Click Save. You can see here object versioning is not supported where retention policy is enabled. And we're going to go ahead and create the bucket. The bucket is now created. You can see that it takes us to that bucket. And if you go to configuration, you can see the settings on retention policy, or that's what we set. We do not allow a permanent retention. We're going to manage that on the Spectrum Protect side. So now that the bucket is created in the IBM Cloud, the setup on Spectrum Protect is identical with what we just went through with the on-premise device. Okay, so we'll define that connection to the IBM Cloud. And we can do a validate cloud just to make sure that we added it okay. We can connect to it. And it looks like it worked. So look at it, and yeah, we've already detected that it's an IBM Cloud Object Storage, and that looks right. And so now we can do the defined storage pool, call it lock 3. We use the connection 3 that we just defined, and we'll enable data lock equals yes, equals 1 day. Okay, so that's defined. Then you can go ahead and define the storage pool directories and start using the pool, just like a regular cloud storage pool. This won't be retention pools or database backup. It's just cloud container pools. So that's the basics of how to set this up and the usage on the IBM Cloud, the public cloud.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Now that you've defined the buckets inside of both the on-premise and public cloud, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Ian, and she's going to walk you through setting up the cloud connections and the storage pool from inside of the Operations Center.
In the OC, the IBM Cloud and IBM COS changes will be shown in the Add Storage Pool Wizard, Quick Look, and Properties. From the Overviews page, to get started with the Add Storage Pool Wizard, we want to go into Storage and then Storage Pools. create a new storage pool, and then pick general, just give it a name, and then next. So those changes are in the on-premises for the ICOS, and then for the public IBM cloud, it's in the off-premises cloud. So let's see the on-premises one first. So click on next. And you can see those new options in the create connection. When you create a new connection, give it a name, and then pick IBM Cloud Object Storage System. And you should be able to see the Cloud Data Lock options here. So if you enable, you can change the lock durations to however many days you want. But I'm not going to go through that because it's kind of similar to the off-premises one. So if you go into the off-premises cloud and click next, create a new connection here. It's all the way down. So you do demo conn, and then select IBM Cloud Storage as the cloud type, and just add your credentials. Here, you add the secret access key, the existing bucket name, and the cloud URL. Okay, and then if we wanted to enable that, just click on this checkbox and then add a lock duration. Click next. It's creating a new cloud connection. And then now that we created a new connection, we just need to add directory on that pool, specify that directory, and then click on this plus sign, and then add the storage pool and click close. And so if we wanted to see that pool and the cloud data lock information, we click on that storage pool and then click on quick look. You should be able to see those information. So cloud data lock equals yes, and then lock duration equals 1 day. And you can also see this information in the details. So clicking on that row and click on the details. And in the properties tab is where you'll see that information, the cloud data lock equals yes, and the lock duration. And if you wanted to change the lock duration, you can unlock this section and change it to 2 days or 1 day or however many days. And then you just click save on here. And if we had containers like Jay was showing earlier, we would see that in the containers tab, and we'll see all the information about those containers. Also, we can see like a filtered version of this grid if we click on this link, and it'll show just the containers that are in pending state for defining the connection and defining the storage pool. And that should be it for the OC site.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Jay. Be sure to check out the other videos we have on using immutable storage with the Spectrum Protect server. Thank you very much.